Is Putin simply an autocrat with no respect for civil liberties or human rights? Is he a national hero and defender of Russian interests? Should we really be more concerned about the threat of nuclear escalation? Welcome to today's free discourse video. Today, we're going to consider the implications of Vladimir Putin's fifth term as president of Russia. Specifically, we're going to consider Putin's extended rule, his handling of the war in Ukraine, his geopolitical ambitions, and the wider implications of his recent re-election. Before we dive deeper, let's think about two fundamental questions on the matter. Firstly, what drives Putin's pursuit of power and influence, which is evident from his prolonged presidency? Secondly, how will Putin's re-election shape Russia's domestic landscape and its stance on the international stage? So, let's consider Putin's political landscape. His extended rule, made possible by constitutional amendments in 2020, underscores his firm grip on power. Surrounded by loyalists and armed with nuclear weapons, Putin's authority transcends national borders, and he can clearly have influence over global affairs. However, his unpredictability and pursuit of power raise concerns about his motives and actions, particularly in the context of the war in Ukraine. It seems that Putin's portrayal of the war in Ukraine as vital for Russia's survival reflects his political calculations. While the conflict wreaks havoc on Ukrainian soil, it serves as a litmus test for Putin's leadership. Withdrawal without a decisive victory risks internal unrest and undermines Putin's image as a wartime leader. The stalled aid to Ukraine and Europe's hesitance empower Putin on the battlefield, fueling his determination to secure what he views as a holy war. But Putin's vision extends beyond Ukraine, aiming to restore Russia's former greatness. While not nostalgic for Soviet-era policies, Putin seems to want to reclaim Russia's sphere of influence, evident in his actions in Belarus and Moldova. The Baltic states and Transnistria loom as potential flashpoints, highlighting Putin's expansionist aspirations and challenging the status quo in Eastern Europe. We should also consider the wider geopolitical dynamics with the United States and China. Tensions between Russia and the United States have escalated since the war in Ukraine began. A potential return of Trump could shift dynamics in Ukraine, while Russia-China collaboration poses challenges to Western dominance. Despite flourishing ties, concerns linger over Beijing's encroachment into Russia's Far Eastern region, adding complexity to the Russia-China partnership. On top of this, Putin's rhetoric on nuclear weapons adds a further layer of uncertainty. While, on the face of it, nuclear weapons are a deterrent, his willingness to entertain the possibility of nuclear conflict has raised alarm. The delicate balance between intimidation and escalation underscores the gravity of Russia's nuclear arsenal in shaping geopolitical dynamics. But with Putin's re-election secured, attention turns to the future. There is considerable speculation around potential Kremlin shake-ups and Putin's next moves in Ukraine. The crackdown on opposition voices is continuing, which is in keeping with Putin's authoritarian tendencies. Yet, amid these uncertainties, Russia grapples with systemic challenges that transcend Putin's rule, which could pose long-term concerns for stability. But what will ordinary people think of all this? At the Free Discourse channel, we value the views of everyone, and not just news anchors and journalists, and hope that our videos help you to formulate your own opinions. So, let's think about what views the public are likely to hold on what's coming next for Putin and Russia. Many will be very concerned about Putin's authoritarian tendencies and the erosion of democratic principles in Russia. Their view would be that Putin's prolonged stay in power, characterized by dubious election processes and crackdowns on political opposition, undermines the country's democratic institutions. They would point to the suppression of dissent, restrictions on media freedom, and allegations of electoral fraud as evidence of Putin's autocratic rule. According to this view, Putin's grip on power poses a threat to political pluralism and human rights in Russia, and his aggressive foreign policy exacerbates tensions with neighboring countries and the West. On the other hand, some will perceive Putin as a national hero and defender of Russia. They would argue that his actions are driven by a sense of patriotism and a desire to protect the country's interests. According to this viewpoint, Putin's strong stance against perceived external threats, such as NATO expansion and Western interference, resonates with a significant portion of the Russian population. This perspective emphasizes Russia's historical role as a major global power and suggests that attempts to undermine Putin's leadership are futile and disrespectful to the nation's sovereignty. A third perspective expresses apprehension about the potential escalation of conflict under Putin's leadership, particularly around the situation in Ukraine. Critics would argue that Putin's assertive military actions, coupled with his rhetoric on nuclear weapons, risk destabilizing the region and triggering a broader international crisis. They would emphasize the need for diplomatic solutions and assert that further military aggression could have catastrophic consequences for both Russia and the global community. This viewpoint underscores the importance of international cooperation in de-escalating tensions and addressing security concerns in the region. So, what do you think? There are clearly a range of opinions on Vladimir Putin's leadership and the future of Russia. On one hand, you could see Putin as a national hero, a defender of Russia's sovereignty against perceived external threats. On the other hand, there are concerns about Putin's authoritarian tendencies and the erosion of democratic principles, both domestically and internationally. Critics highlight the suppression of dissent and the curtailing of political freedoms as alarming indicators of Putin's autocratic rule. On the other hand, perhaps the most important concern is how geopolitical tensions and the threat of nuclear war can be de-escalated. Amidst these contrasting views, a critical question emerges: do you see Putin as a stabilizing force protecting Russian interests, or as a figure undermining democracy and international stability? The questions remain: where do you stand on the debate surrounding Putin's leadership, and what future do you envision for Russia and its role on the global stage? I hope this free discourse video has helped you to understand this topic more clearly. If so, don't forget to like the video and consider subscribing for regular updates on the most important of world affairs.